Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving right in today with a story about a secret fortune, a $100 billion fortune, and the massive controversy it kicked off.
Okay, let's just start with the number that really got this whole conversation going back in 2019. $100 billion. Just let that sink in for a second.
So here's a question for you. What if your church had a secret fund this big? I mean, really think about that, because that question is right at the heart of a huge controversy involving the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its, well, massive and very little-known investment fund.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at the sheer scale of this wealth, then dive into the allegations about shell companies. We'll cover the rainy day defense, touch on the big humanitarian questions, and finally, see where all this wealth is headed.
Okay, first up, the $100 billion secret. And really, to get why this is such a big deal, you first have to try and comprehend the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the money we're talking about here.
So, at the very center of this whole story is a company called Ensign Peak Advisors. Now, this isn't just any company. It's a non-profit investment manager set up by the church way back in 1997. Its whole job? To manage the church's reserve funds. And these funds come from the surplus of member tithing, the 10% of their income that members donate.
Now, according to the SEC, that's the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, by 2018, the portfolio managed by Ensign Peak had already ballooned to about $32 billion, and that was before this story even broke.
But then, 2019 happens. A whistleblower comes forward, and this person alleges that the fund hadn't just grown, it had stockpiled nearly $100 billion. And as you can imagine, that number just blew the whole thing wide open into the public spotlight.
And you know what? The fund just kept on growing. Fast forward to late 2023, and public filings show that just the U.S. stock portion of this portfolio, just that one piece, had soared past $60 billion. Incredible.
But wait, because even that $60 billion is just a slice of the pie. When you look at independent analyses that factor in everything, we're talking vast real estate holdings, businesses, the whole shebang. The church's total estimated wealth is closer to, get this, $293 billion.
So to put that number into perspective for you, that reported stockpile is nearly double the size of Harvard University's famous massive endowment. It's truly one of the largest private investment funds on the entire planet. No exaggeration. So the big question is, how on earth did a fund this huge stay secret for so long? Well, that leads us right into the next part of our story, the whistleblower, the SEC investigation, and some really serious allegations.
Okay, so the main accusation, and this was later backed up by the SEC, by the way, is that for 22 years, from 1997 to 2019, the fund's massive holdings were intentionally hidden, not just from the public, but from regulators too.
The guy who blew the whistle, David Nielsen, was an insider. He was a former portfolio manager at Ensign Peak, and he claimed the fund wasn't being used for charitable purposes at all. His exact words were pretty damning. He called it a clandestine hedge fund.
And it wasn't just an allegation. In February 2023, the SEC officially brought charges against both the church and Ensign Peak. The commission's report said they went to great lengths to hide the portfolio. And how did they do it? By using 13 different shell companies, front companies, all to avoid revealing just how big their holdings had become.
All right, so you have these incredibly serious findings from the SEC. The big question is, how did the church respond to all this?
And this really gets to the heart of the whole debate. You've got two totally different ways of looking at this. On one side, you have critics saying, this is secrecy, this is hiding, this is hoarding. But on the other side, the church's view is, no, this is about confidentiality, privacy, and just prudent savings.
The church's leaders have been really consistent on this point. They describe the fund as a rainy day account. And the idea, they say, is to have a buffer for the future, to make sure that crucial work, like their global missionary programs, can keep going even if the economy takes a nosedive. But, and this is a big but, critics jump right on the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, if there was ever a global rainy day, that was it, right? And during that massive recession, reports say the church actually trimmed its budget instead of dipping into this gigantic reserve fund.
So when you have this vast pile of money that's apparently been accumulating for decades and is rarely ever touched, it naturally leads to a pretty powerful what-if question.
What could all this wealth actually achieve in the world?
Well, one analysis really tries to put this into perspective, and the numbers are just staggering. It suggests that if you used just 10% of the church's estimated assets every year, just 10%, you could potentially solve some of the world's biggest humanitarian problems. We're talking about things like eliminating severe global hunger or providing clean water for everyone on the planet.
So that brings us to today. Where does this colossal fund stand now? And what can we learn from looking at what it's actually invested in?
Well, if you look at the part of the portfolio that's now public, it is heavily invested in big tech. I mean, its top holding is in the AI powerhouse Nvidia, and that stake alone is worth over $4.5 billion. And right behind that, you've got huge investments in Microsoft and Apple.
And the growth isn't slowing down, not at all. In fact, some analysts are projecting that based on the current trajectory, the church's total combined assets could pass $1 trillion sometime in the next 20 years or so.
So all of this leaves us with a really fundamental and maybe uncomfortable question. For an institution that's dedicated to charity and faith, where exactly is the line between being a prudent saver and just hoarding wealth? At what point does a rainy day fund stop being a fund and just become an ocean?